types of events, they do create an extraordinary environment. They get people challenging themselves whilst raising money, spark business opportunities, whilst, I guess, looking at the sort of bigger picture, supporting that sort of concept of social mobility, which is obviously what they're striving to try and achieve.
Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator, specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. So I am delighted this week to be joined by Andrew Cook, who's Chief Development and Commercial Officer at Repton School. And we're going to be diving into the subject of broadening the fundraising mix. So Repton School is a co-educational independent day and boarding school for pupils aged 3 to 18. It's situated in the heart of Derbyshire in a rural area here in the UK. And its history stretches back more than 450 years to its founding in 1557. Andrew joined Repton School in 2019 and he oversees both the development office and also Repton Enterprise. So that's the commercial arm where they generate income for the school by hosting conferences, weddings, residential courses, sports activities and so on. And back in the summer of 2020, I actually spoke to Andrew on this podcast, but specifically about generating commercial income for schools. So I'll put the link to that episode in the episode notes. But this time we are focusing on fundraising, and we're going to be talking about challenge events and their potential for fundraising within independent schools, and also about corporate and trust and foundations fundraising for schools. So before joining Repton, Andrew had a whole range of commercial experience, and immediately prior to joining the school, he was Director of Fundraising and Communications for Walking with the Wounded for 7 years. And he draws in our conversation on his experience there, fundraising, but not within the education sector, to bring some really innovative and new concepts and ideas to what we should be looking to do and broadening our fundraising mix for schools. Really quickly, before we dive into the detail, I want to make sure that you make the most of the time you invest listening to this podcast. And the best way to do that is to make sure you grab a copy of my free ebook, The Strategic Independent School Leader. It outlines how to answer the 6 essential questions that will clarify your school strategy and secure its future. In the world of business, strategy can be full of jargon, but it doesn't have to be that way. This is a jargon-free tool tailor-made to help private school leaders think and act more strategically. Download your free copy today at www.consultjuliette.co.uk/ebook. So I hope you enjoy my conversation today with Andrew Cook. So welcome back to the Independent School Podcast, Andrew. It's fantastic to have you here.
Thanks, it's lovely to be back.
Brilliant. So Andrew, as we've just heard in the introduction, you bring a whole wealth of experience across different sectors before you started within Repton, your current school. So across business development, PR, marketing, communications, fundraising. And then before joining Repton, the last kind of job that you held was fundraising and communications at Walking with the Wounded. So focusing on some of the veterans that are most at risk in society. I'd be really interested to kick off our conversation to understand a little bit better what inspired you to make the move into the independent school sector and Repton in particular.
Sure. So I guess having spent just over sort of 20 years in roles focusing on growing revenues, audience, profile for commercial organisations, and as you say, more recently, a military charity, Walking with the Wounded. And I guess in light of the fact that I was the first person in my family ever to attend an independent school, and that was in no small part as a result of receiving a bursary myself. I've always been very excited about the thought of utilising that professional experience to create opportunities for those who fundamentally have great talent, ambition, leadership qualities, and who could benefit greatly from a place at an independent school where they may be able to have a better chance of realising that potential. With regards to Repton specifically, and actually having spoken to quite a few schools over the 18 months, 2 years preceding me joining Repton, it was clear that having appointed Mark Semments as the headmaster, who originally worked in the commercial sector, Emma Bateman as COO, who'd come straight from industry, from Clark's and Screwfix, that although the governors were acutely aware of their responsibilities to remain first and foremost an educational provider, there was a need to create an environment where commercial skills would sit at the heart of how the school would create and deliver a sustainable strategy suitable for, I guess, the changing environment in which independent schools are now operating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's sometimes a tension in some schools that you have the importance that you are an independent business. You have to think commercially in terms of making sure you are sustainable as a school, as a business going forwards. And yet education is obviously at the heart of everything that you do as an organisation. So it's persuading people internally and externally that that combination of commercial and business experience with the really strong educationalists that are already in place within these schools is a really powerful combination. And I think part of that is bringing in perspectives from outside the education sector. So in this case, educational fundraising. We have a very set way of doing things sometimes within educational fundraising. I think it's really interesting to bring in new ideas from outside that sector. And in some of our previous conversations, you've mentioned that you are intentionally broadening the fundraising mix at Repton, so diversifying some of those income streams that you have coming in from philanthropy. So beyond what we traditionally see in independent schools into new areas, what was your thinking behind that? What led you to try to diversify your income streams in that way?
Well, I think irrespective of COVID and the changing environment in the last sort of year or so, I think it's really incumbent upon any organisation in whatever sector they're in to continually try and evolve. Otherwise, one just sort of stagnates and ultimately gets left behind. But I think specifically with regards to Repton, ostensibly it's to future-proof our charitable fundraising capabilities, broadening the donor base, easing the pressure on, I guess, the usual suspects of alumni or Reptonians, parents, friends of the school, and trying to increase donations during a global pandemic, which is obviously creating uncertainty in the job market and the broader global economy. I do think boarding schools in particular offer a unique opportunity for challenger-type fundraising events, which have been very prevalent in the charity sector in recent years, by playing on the competitive aspects of year groups, different boarding houses, and the like. But as I say, I think ostensibly it's about being innovative and constantly evolving.
Absolutely. So let's dive into that event side of things first of all. So I know that you've been running quite a few, or had been running quite a few fundraising events when you were working with Walking with the Wounded. And I'd love to know about how you're what you were doing there, and then how you've translated it into your school environment now.
Sure. Well, as I say, challenger type events have been very popular in the charity sector for probably the last sort of 7 or 8 years. In terms of the events that we used to do, there are 2 or 3 that spring to mind. We created sort of 2 annual flagship events, one in the summer called the Cumbrian Challenge, and then one in the winter called Walking Home for Christmas. The Cumbrian Challenge was ostensibly 600 people going up to the lakes for a weekend. They turn up on the Friday, they have a briefing, and then on the Saturday, there's either a 10, 20, 30k yomp they can do through the hills with our beneficiaries. As I say, we get about 600 supporters up there, quite a good mix of corporates and individuals. So it was a sort of B2C and B2B offering, teams of 4, and then on the Saturday evening, when you came off the hill, there was barbecue, a few drinks, prize giving, etc. And we we'd probably raise in the region of 350,000 from that event. And then Walking Home for Christmas was a very different type of event, albeit still in the challenger bracket, if you will. But it was, again, corporates as well as individuals. And ostensibly it was to walk home for Christmas to support those veterans who didn't have a home to walk to, that were homeless. So you could walk a mile, 100 miles. We had people that would walk from London back to their families at Christmas and sort of sleep rough overnight. We had a grandmother who actually walked from Suffolk to Belfast, obviously with a boat in between, but to raise money in the memory of her grandson who'd been killed in Afghanistan. So it was a fantastic event, but both of them, not only did they raise significant sums of money, but they were a great way for our beneficiaries to engage with our fundraisers, which makes it very emotive and very successful. And then another one, we used to do a bike ride every year with the British and Irish Lions rugby guys, and so we did a bike ride to commemorate the anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo, where we cycled from Waterloo back to London, and these types of things. So there were a number of events that we did that, as I said, not only raised a lot of money, but enabled us to create platforms for our beneficiaries to meet our donors.
And I'm imagining as well some of that competitive spirit that's kind of natural within certainly independent school communities kind of comes through as well, and getting groups of alumni to come and take part. And okay, it's not about the competition, but some of that naturally comes through in these events, I would imagine.
No, absolutely, and so we're looking to see how we can replicate that. I mean, we've got some plans that we're looking to enact at Repton, but obviously over the last year or so, it's been very difficult to deliver against those. And I'm going to get the ball rolling myself, actually, by cycling 200 miles around the border of Derbyshire in a day to raise money for our transformational bursary pot, just to sort of get the ball rolling and get the mindset in place for these types of events. And there's going to be some teachers getting involved with me at various stages of that ride.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, as with everything, we've had to adapt what we're doing for COVID. And I've seen quite a few of these challenger events now are adapting to a little bit like the model that you had for the Walking Home for Christmas, in the sense that everyone's doing their own thing, but they're coming together in terms of it's under a banner. And obviously the social media activity can help with certain audiences, certain age groups, to help create that sense of bringing people together. So everyone's doing something independently, but it's actually all towards the same cause and in the same area in terms of what they're actually, the activity that they're undertaking. So
yeah, and I certainly think, I think it's pretty obvious that post-COVID, everyone's going to be desperate to see one another and get out and socialise and build those communities again. I think we're all probably a little bit sick to death of Teams and Zoom meetings and quizzes and whatever else, which have served a purpose. But I think no substitute for actually seeing people face to face. So I think these types of events will be very welcome.
Yeah, and I can see, a Lake District walk up the mountain being in the fresh air, and therefore slightly more feasible than an inside your hall kind of annual dinner type event with 300 people in a room. I can see the walk coming back quicker than the internal event. So yeah, interesting. One of the things that's always, I'll be honest, one of the things that's always put me off these sorts of events is the amount of time and kind of behind the scenes effort and pulling in favours that has to happen to make them work, and that actually there's sort of a hidden cost to some of this fundraising activity. How did you overcome that when you were working with Walking for the Wounded?
It's just a very good point. And the reality is that Walking with the Wounded, we had a very, very small fundraising team. There were 3 or 4 people in the team, and so you had to work in a sort of very efficient manner. I think if you look at the sums of money that we're talking about in terms of what it could raise, and you look at that in the context of the resource and time it takes to raise 250,000 from regular giving, or indeed the time lag between running a legacy campaign and then actually being in receipt of legacy funds, events organised in the right way can provide a real opportunity to generate large-scale income relatively quickly. If we look at the Cumbrian Challenge, for example, and put it into context, if 400 alumni raise £500 each from their own personal networks, and I think that's the important point, not just from themselves, but actually from their networks, then you can raise 200,000 relatively quickly. in terms of the resource required, we actually used to team up with an organisation based in the Lake District. So we would partner with them, where ostensibly they would organise everything on the mountain. So they would do the marshalling, they'd liaise with mountain rescue, they'd do the route maps, etc. And then we would organise everything off the mountain, so the catering, the marquee, etc., camping and such like. Now, there was a cost to that, obviously, but like any business, there is a cost of sale, and I think people shouldn't be afraid of putting a cost of fundraising into their budgets. So it would cost us probably, I think it was around 22,000 that it would cost us to partner with that organisation.
Mm-hmm.
But the professional expertise, the peace of mind, the support, and the platform it enabled us to generate fundraising income from, as the numbers would suggest, we would raise a multiple of 15 of that, quite easily. The other benefit that you have with doing that sort of event with a school is you have access to alumni as volunteers. So you have a massive potential volunteer base from which you can utilise additional resource, provide corporate sponsorship, potentially from an alumni's organisation if they run their own business, where potentially 50% of the funds raised could go to their corporate charity of choice, and 50% to the Transformational Bursary Fund. And also these types of events, they do create an extraordinary environment. They get people challenging themselves whilst raising money. It allows alumni to reconnect with old friends, make new ones, sparks business opportunities, and importantly provides a platform for them to get out to their own audience of beneficiaries and meet those beneficiaries, whilst, I guess, looking at the sort of bigger picture, supporting that sort of concept of social mobility, which is obviously what we're striving to try and achieve.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's worth drawing some parallels here between, as you said, some of that regular giving activity. So when we do telephone campaigns or giving days, it's fairly common, not everybody, but it's fairly common for a school to understand that investing in expert support to enable your team to ramp up to do something with a really short time frame but a really kind of exciting momentum behind it is a really worthwhile way to invest in a fundraising function. And so investing in an event like this, you can absolutely see the parallel that getting an organisation who's an expert in these sorts of adventure activities is a no-brainer. It's really worth investing that. And then, as you say, you have to invest in fundraising to have a return. And so being really conscious about reviewing and reflecting after the event on what worked, what didn't, what was worth it, what would you change next time. But innovating always takes some risk, takes some element of putting some money in and seeing if you can generate the return on investment that you're looking for. And in this case, the return on investment is potentially really significant. So it's well worth exploring as an opportunity. The other thing which I think is really impactful is it's like all good fundraising, the pound in the bank is not the only positive outcome. There is a community spirit and momentum that build through the actual fundraising itself. And you see that obviously through giving days and also in major campaigns, the community spirit that comes together in lots of people supporting one activity. So getting the beneficiaries, engaging with the supporters, as you mentioned earlier, and bringing the community together, as you just said, utilising volunteers as well as alumni as participants, incredibly powerful in terms of getting that transformational bursary message out there.
It also, those sort of platforms where you have big groups of people together and they actually see firsthand the impact that you're having by having some of the previous beneficiaries there with you. It really helps to galvanise that community and to engage with them going forward, from which you obviously can steward into other areas of potential fundraising, such as legacies.
Absolutely.
So it has a short term benefit as well as a long term impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And strategic fundraising is all about finding the activities that actually can tick lots of boxes of what you're trying to achieve. And certainly these challenger events would achieve that. So we've mentioned so far, we've kind of mentioned in passing that this is for transformational bursaries. I'm guessing, my instinct says it would work better for that because alumni are reaching out to their own networks. work better for transformational bursaries than, say, a swimming pool campaign or a new science block or something. I suppose there's nothing to stop it working for those capital campaign projects, but is your instinct that this is really neatly aligned to the bursary fundraising?
I think so, yes. I think there may be opportunities within a CapEx project if the CapEx project is very community focused. Then there may be an opportunity to run something in a similar manner. But I think primarily it's going to be for transformational bursaries where there is that connection to the school and that emotive connection, which I think is crucial to deliver.
Yeah. And then that leads us on to the other area of broadening the fundraising mix, which I wanted to talk to you about, which is the corporate fundraising, or indeed institutional fundraising, so trusts and foundations as well. We see within the education sector here in the UK a lot of corporate fundraising going on. And we are seeing some corporate fundraising within the independent school sector. But in our recent conversation before this podcast, you mentioned that you thought this was underutilised by independent schools. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are on how that can be better used within schools and what you're doing at Repton within corporate fundraising.
Yeah, I think the corporate fundraising within schools is understandably not an area that's been focused on as much as others. And actually, indeed, I've spoken to a few heads about corporate fundraising, and they've been somewhat surprised that it's been brought up. I think if I look back to Walking with the Wounded, which clearly is a very different animal to working in a school and fundraising for a school, but we would work a lot with corporates, tapping into their CSR initiatives, and actually just trying to look at ways in which we could innovate with what we were doing and the case for support and the rationale, etc. And actually, there was one instance where rather than an existing corporate partner of ours at Walking with the Wounded, rather than them do their annual fundraising event and raise it in general for fundraising for homeless veterans or veterans with mental health issues, they actually committed to funding a new fundraising manager at the charity for the first 18 months that they were at the charity. And the reason for that was that they would donate £6,500 a quarter over 6 quarters, so for 18 months. And that actually realised that person could then generate £150,000, £200,000 of fundraising income, that actually they were getting a much better return in the short term, which would then allow us to be more sustainable going forward. So it was a way in which we developed a partnership with that corporate. Now, clearly that's a very different context and one that we wouldn't be able to necessarily replicate within the school. But there are other ways in which those corporate partnerships can be evolved, specifically around the transformational bursaries. I'm thinking, look, where we are in Repton, we're very close to Rolls-Royce, for example. Now, the conversation that we would have with them, actually a sixth form student from Repton recently got a scholarship to Rolls-Royce for university. Now, would they look to potentially extend that relationship in going 50-50 and part funding a bursary alongside the Repton Foundation for a sixth form student studying maths and looking to go into a career in engineering? Roald Dahl, who's obviously a former alumni of Repton, with the Roald Dahl Foundation, looked to partner with us for an English scholar in the sixth form. So there are potential opportunities there which would support a corporate CSR approach with social mobility, and could have the added benefit for someone like Rolls-Royce of extending that sponsorship of education into university and then into working for the organisation post-university. So it's not going to be right for everybody, and it's not going to be right for every corporate, but it's certainly within the corporate side an area that we are going to be looking to evolve as we go forward.
Yeah.
And then on the grant giving trusts and foundations, this is where there really needs to be a community angle and a societal benefit to the work that we're doing. And that could be through bursaries for social mobility. That could be a CapEx project where we are funding for a facility that the community will be able to have substantial use of. Mm-hmm. And that could be a swimming pool, it could be tennis courts, it could be a music block, a theatre, but there has to be that community angle to it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, again, just like our previous comments, often for the corporates, it's a nice match to a sixth form bursary, because by that age, the children can be given an award which is specifically for excellence within a particular subject. So as you mentioned, Rolls-Royce linking through to maths as a future career track into engineering, English for the Roald Dahl Foundation, making these connections to a sixth form subject can be a natural way of engaging a corporate in a particular area of the school that they're really interested in. But I think it's also about creating the future pipeline of talent for that corporate, or perhaps for that sector rather than that individual corporate organisation. So a lot of corporates at the moment are thinking about how to diversify the talent that they have coming in kind of post-university graduate program level. And that diversity would include gender, ethnicity, all the areas where we are naturally thinking about disadvantage with regards to the way that bursaries are allocated in terms of the social mobility boost that it can give to individuals. So there seems to be a natural connection there. But the challenge to me always seems to be getting through that first barrier of a corporate immediately saying, why on earth would we want to fund an independent school? Now, there are many reasons that you can put a case for support together, inspirational, transformational bursaries in particular, as to why they should, but it's getting through the door sometimes, isn't it? That's the challenge. And overcoming generations of stereotyping around independent education. Do you have any thoughts on how to get through that barrier and overcome that barrier?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, and I think it's something that will naturally be there and be front of mind for those in the corporate world. I think the perception and the messaging need to be very transparent, and providing financial support to the independent school sector, clearly is not the way to focus on it. It's not the key message. The key message here is investing in a young person to realise their potential and to support social mobility and diversity. And whilst I would absolutely accept that in isolation, Repton aren't going to do that across the whole of society, we need to start somewhere, and I think this is the power of the independent school sector, is that replicating this time and time again in a number of different areas will then start having an impact, and it's going to be a generational one. But as I said, we need to start somewhere. But it's not about corporates supporting the operational costs of an independent school. We're not sitting here making a margin out of it. This is about investing in young talent, and as I said, there are areas where this would equally resonate with capex projects, but this is fundamentally focusing on transformational bursaries. It's the big difference between fee remission, where in my view, fee remission is where a school wants to buy talent, to either have a good music school or to have a better first 11 in girls hockey or whatever it might be. There's a big difference between buying that talent and investing in that talent through transformational bursaries. And so it's the messaging and the positioning of it, which I think is so crucial. And the partnership aspect, and looking to do something over a period of time that's got to be relevant for the corporate as well, and what they're trying to achieve, and what's in their best interest. Because corporate philanthropy is an absolute necessity in the modern age. But I don't think any CEO is going to wake up on a Monday morning and suddenly start being incredibly philanthropic if it's not going to have some positive impact on their bottom line. And so, that's absolutely key as well. But as you say, generating a broader pipeline of talent is crucial for any business, and diversifying that talent pool, is something that we can support with. We can support them with. As I say, they're not investing in or paying for our operating costs. The corporate supporting the individual, the school, I guess, is merely providing the infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is that partnership, isn't it? It's the partnership finding what works for the corporate and what works for the school, but it's also the school putting some money in often. And you mentioned sort of a 50-50 match idea. And I think it's not always essential, but often that is really beneficial for showing a corporate right from the early days, we're in this for the right reasons. We're not doing this as a front to some other nefarious reason that we need to do this. This is an independent school genuinely putting its values and its ethos with regards to its place in society front and center of its fundraising. And so, yes, leading with the impact on young people and the fact that it happens to be through an independent school education is secondary to that. And I think, as you said before, it won't be right for every corporate. To some extent, this is a numbers game, just like major gifts fundraising. It's getting out there, knowing what you have to offer and what your parameters are in terms of what you're willing to do, and then getting out there and talking to as many corporates as possible and getting their feedback, learning from the process. And so if you have a local big employer, that's a good place to start, especially if it happens to be Rolls-Royce, as you said, a big national name that happens to be local. But even other local significant employers, local corporates are a good place to start in terms of forging these partnerships, these relationships, and just seeing what's possible over time.
And in a similar vein to stewarding individuals for major gifts, you're building a relationship with a corporate. Now, that might start by an organisation coming in and using your conference facility. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we're looking at doing, or I'm looking at initiating at Repton, part of my remit is to oversee Repton Enterprises, to commercialise the assets of the school, is that a percentage of corporate bookings into Repton Enterprises is donated to the Transformational Bursary Fund. So a corporate part of our messaging is that come and use our conference facility or come and use our theatre, and in so doing you'll also be supporting transformational bursaries for social mobility, and so it might start off in that vein, and then once they start using your facilities and you start building that relationship, it could be developed further into something more substantial. But I think the 50-50 split is also very important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the great thing about that percentage of the commercial lettings going to the bursary fund, it means right from the very first time that anyone books your facilities, they get told, we also have this transformational bursary fund and we feel so passionately about it that a percentage of the profits goes to that. And so it's signalling not only are we going to inform you about the fact that we have this fund, but it's signalling we care about this. This is central to what we're doing, which I think echoes all the best practice for all forms of individual major gifts fundraising. It's the same general techniques, but the difference for corporate fundraising is also understanding from their mindset what's in it for them, to put it bluntly, how it's going to be aligned with their best interest, and positioning what you're offering them in a way which is aligned to what they are looking for.
And I think there's also a need to demonstrate credibility. The Repton Foundation will only raise charitable funds for transformational bursaries. It won't raise charitable funds for fee remission. So it won't be applicable for a middle-class family looking to get 15-20% off their children's school fees. This is purely transformational, 110% support for an individual. And so, as I say, it's got to be credible.
Yeah, and that transparency of the way it's set up and building that trust in the relationship over time builds that credibility. Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew, for spending some time with us this morning. It has been a really fantastic conversation. I think we've touched on a large number of elements which are foundational to successful fundraising, but specifically looking at broadening that fundraising mix and seeing how it applies within challenger events and also corporate and trust and foundation fundraising as well. So the idea of future-proofing your fundraising mix, diversifying the supporter base that you are relying on, has got to be a strong strategic move going forwards. Inevitably, if your school is new to these areas, there will be an element of small risks that you will take at each point. And I encourage you to be reflective and innovative in terms of the potential ways that you can fundraise going forwards, and always learning from everything that we try. Even if something doesn't go completely to plan, you will have learned a huge amount in the process. So thank you, Andrew, for joining us this week and sharing with us your views on these areas.
Thank you.
To everyone else, have a strategic week ahead of you, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye then. Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.